What's up, everybody? Who were the biggest winners of the 2024 signing day, and who are some 2025 names making their latest commitments? Locked On SEC starts right now.
You are Locked On SEC, your daily podcast on the Southeastern Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And what is up, everybody? Welcome into Locked On SEC. Thank you guys so much for making us your first listen every day. I'm Chris Gordy. Thanks for making Locked On SEC, again, your first listen. And shout out to everydayers who come and check us out every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers join today and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Welcome in our special guest, our buddy Brian Smith. He is our Locked On recruiting insider. And Brian, it used to be, maybe you got a little downtime, but it's like we just closed the book on the 2024 classes, and now we immediately move on to the class of 2025. Welcome in, man. How are you?
Doing well. It's actually busier from February through May than any other time of the year for me. Under Armour camps, 7-on-7, spring ball, and then just visiting high schools. You don't know who's who until you go see them, but it's a lot of fun too.
Well, let's touch on it, man. And by the way, all of our recruiting segments are presented by LinkedIn Jobs. If you own a small business, you're looking to hire to your team, make sure you check out LinkedIn Jobs. They help you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Go post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege. Terms and conditions apply. Brian, let's get into it. We closed the book last week, finally, on National Signing Day. It's a little bit of a joke. We call that National Signing Day because I think over half the country, their work was done. They didn't even do anything on National Signing Day because of the early signing period. But what'd you make of the classes? Obviously, a lot of the legwork had already been done. But who, in your opinion, were some of the biggest winners of National Signing Day?
The ones that were done were the biggest winners, to be honest with you, because that means they already solidified everything and they were focusing on 25. As far as the day itself, A&M getting Terry Bussey over in your neck of the woods in the state of Texas. For anybody that has not seen really fun film, go put on Terry Bussey. That is an electric guy. At the state Texas finals, he was setting records as quarterback. In the Under Armour game that I went and watched him at, he's a guy playing slot, making everybody look bad, and A&M's recruited him to play corner. It doesn't matter where you put him, he's electric. So I like the Aggies. It's cool to see Elko kind of get a nice running start there. LSU kind of sewed up a really good class. They got the top D tackle that they flipped, ironically, from A&M. So it's the typical SEC stuff, just less of it towards the end, and most of it is in the first end, which was December 20th.
It's funny. I put up the graphic of the 24/7 composite. I know everybody, some people go with On3, SI, ESPN. It's all kind of, if you're a fan of one team, you're going to go with whichever service has your team ranked the highest. But looking at kind of the classes, and no surprise, Brian, I mean, the SEC makes up almost the majority of the entire top 25. And we do include Texas and Oklahoma in that bunch now because they are recruiting in SEC territory. But who kind of surprised you in terms of, sewing up a really good class?
I think Auburn stepping up was a big part of it. But maybe the one the most was Missouri. They got Winery, obviously the big-time defensive lineman, that in-state kid. He was at Under Armour, and holy cow, does he fill out a uniform. 6'5", 250, can play standing up or put his hand in the dirt and get after it. But Auburn's class, they finally got the defensive players up front they needed. They really needed D-line help. That was really good. And Oklahoma, they didn't have the depth. Kind of saw that last year towards the back end of the season. Oklahoma recruited another really good class, and I don't think anybody's going to doubt that once things get going there, Venables, especially on defense, is going to have some players. They got the players they needed up front, Jaden Jackson, et cetera. They got some really great players on defensive line. Seeing Alabama and Georgia at the top, anybody surprised by that? Not me. Texas, number 6, LSU 7. We can almost pencil those in the top 5 to 8 schools every single year. That's not going to change anytime soon.
The interesting one is Florida. They finished 14th. And obviously they had a top 10 recruiting class, for much of the offseason leading up to this. And, it was an interesting time for Billy Napier. He did get some of the big fish, locked in DJ Lagway, the quarterback. But, man, it just seems like Billy Napier, as good of a class as that is, Florida's got to be in the top 10 if he's going to survive this thing.
The question is, can he survive the first 6 games of 2024? I mean, they open up in Miami. They may not finish out this recruiting class, and right now I don't necessarily like them too because of their schedule. I'm sure you've talked about it on your show. They got the toughest schedule in 24, and it's a tough situation to go through because if you're Florida, you're not going to accept as a booster, as your fan base, the students, 3 years in a row mediocrity. And it's not that they're going to be bad, but are they really going to be as good as you want? And the schedule is not going to help. But if they lose that first game to Miami, especially if they got beat down in the swamp, that would be concerning for me. I don't think he's going to make it.
Talking with Brian Smith, our Locked On recruiting insider. And Brian, a quick thought on Tennessee. I know Josh Heupel, maybe took a little bit of a step back last year from what people were expecting from him, but Nico Yamaliava looked very good in the bowl game. And I've even seen some people, Barrett Sallee, putting out there maybe a dark horse Heisman candidate for this year. I think it's at plus 1,700 you can get in on. But I say all that to say, still a pretty good recruiting class Josh Heupel built for 2024, building for 2025, and trying to put some pieces around Nico, because if he is the real deal, they're going to want to have all this talent surrounding him the next 2 to 3 years while he's a starter.
Well, they got a guy with one of the strongest arms that I've ever seen throw. I've seen him live. Holy moly. And he's a good athlete. For those of you who don't know, he was like a national recruit in volleyball. He might have been the best volleyball player in the country in high school as well. So he can certainly run. He can make the RPO game work. If they get enough skill around him is one thing. I'm curious how they do up front. If they got a running game where he can consistently use RPO and play action, the Vols are going to put up monster numbers. And that guy right there on the screen, Mr. Heupel, knows how to operate a passing game. He did it himself when he was at Oklahoma. I just need to see a few more pieces kind of come together. But it wouldn't shock me if they were in the running for the SEC towards the end of the year. I don't think they have all the pieces to win it, but that would also help them with another recruiting class when Nico's going into his junior year. So it's fun to see Tennessee be good again, and hopefully Nico's that guy that can get them into the contention for a college football playoff berth.
As we close out the thoughts on the 2024 class, anybody a little bit disappointing? I'm looking at Arkansas because the big selling point was, we're going to have a good recruiter and we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And man, it just feels like we're going to hit the end of the road here soon for Arkansas and the expectations, because it's a proud fan base, but man, they are just not getting it done. And particularly, like, if he was recruiting at a top 10 level right now, you could say, okay, we're going to be just fine. But Sam Pittman, man, it just feels like he's got to be doing better than this.
31st and behind Mississippi State. If you're behind Mississippi State in the recruiting rankings of the Southeastern Conference, that is nowhere you want to be. I think they're in trouble. I think much like the situation with Napier I'm not trying to be mean, but if they don't win 7-8 games this year, which I don't expect them to do, what is Arkansas going to do? At what point do you pull the plug? Recruiting's not going the way you want. You didn't have a great season last year. Your quarterback transferred out. Yeah, that's a tough situation. They need some momentum on the recruiting trail to kind of help the offseason be smoothed over a little bit. But they recruit most of their kids from out of state, which takes a little longer. This is a very important spring for them to win a few recruiting battles that they maybe didn't normally win. Maybe get a Dallas kid, maybe get a kid from Shreveport, something like that LSU or A&M wanted. But otherwise, I'm kind of like you. It's like Arkansas not the greatest job, but they shouldn't be behind Mississippi State in the recruiting rankings either.
Well, another one that we're going to touch on, Alabama, and what is going on there with Kalen DeBoer over there in T-Town. We're going to talk about that next with Brian Smith. Thank you guys again for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. We'll touch on the Crimson Tide here coming up next. But first, I want to remind you guys this episode is presented to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Look, you can get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. And, of course, all the different NBA action you got going on. We're just hitting the All-Star break. There's still plenty of more games to go. And it's fun to bet on just one game or the over-under, but, man, it's fun to do the parlays. You can parlay a couple of games a night in the NBA, and you can hit big. They got exclusive props. All of it is up there for you at FanDuel. Just go to visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and go shoot your shot today. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's going to get you the special offer, the $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Again, they are FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. As we get back into it with our buddy Brian Smith, our recruiting insider here at Locked On, and thank you guys for making us your first listen every day. Brian, before we get into the new head coach at Alabama, let me take you back a couple weeks because I haven't talked to you since then. Where were you when you heard the news that Nick Saban was calling it quits? Kind of took us all by surprise.
I was just browsing the internet on my computer and somebody announced it. And I remember looking at the screen like, I've been talking about this for years, thought I was prepared for the moment, but I kind of had to take it in. I was at the Iron Bowl, the last one. I was down on the field, and I remember taking photos of him. He seemed no different that day than he is any other. But obviously he kept things pretty close to the vest, and it kind of took people by surprise because, I mean, a lot of kids left that program quickly after Nick decided to hang it up. A lot of kids picked him, not the Alabama logo, as the reason they went to play for Alabama. And that's kind of the sign of the times. Kids want to play for certain coaches more than schools, but he's an icon, and you and I probably will not cover anybody more magnificent than Nick Saban.
Yeah, and not just the X's and O's of winning football games and winning championships. He won in the recruiting field. I mean, that's where you do your bread and butter and building a roster, and Nick Saban did it better than anybody, building elite classes after elite classes. It's funny, some years they would have the number 2 class, and Bama fans were complaining, why aren't we number 1? I mean, it's so funny how almost spoiled that. Yeah, just that fan base became spoiled over the years. It's amazing, but let's talk a little bit about his replacement, Kalen DeBoer. He comes over from Washington, a guy that I immediately said, okay, good X's and O's guy, but can he recruit in the South? And a lot of people are telling me, whatever, it's Alabama, it recruits itself. But you got to be able to recruit here, and he's bringing a lot of guys from the West Coast that have never been down to the South before. So tell me your thoughts on Kalen DeBoer and adjusting to the SEC country and recruiting.
Well, I live in the state of Alabama now, and a lot of the people telling you that that's going to be easy are also Alabama fans. The same fans that were saying a certain coach that was just fired at Auburn from the West Coast that coached at Boise State wasn't going to make it. It's called bias. It's very difficult to win down here with the recruiting if you don't have some of their guys. This state, Texas, certain states, if you don't have homegrown people, fair or unfair, those high school coaches are not as likely to be friendly with you. Now, it's still Alabama. That is not debated. But Kalen needs certain guys on his staff not to be good on the trail. They need to be elite. Alabama is expected to have a top 5 class bare minimum every year. Your point about them bitching about a number 2 class is fact. There were years they were not happy they finished number 2, which is kind of puts things in perspective on how good Alabama's been. But he's going to have to win recruiting battles against Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, or Auburn, LSU, Florida State in his backyard. And he's a guy that's coached out west. It's not as easy as it sounds because recruiting is all relationships, and he's starting anew at the top of the top in the penthouse of college football in Alabama. I'm not sure how quickly that's going to go. There's never been a case like this that I'm aware of. A true legend leaving and then somebody from an opposite coast taking over is pretty rare. I don't have a specific expectation, but he better have guys on the staff that have gung-ho, ready to go, and I know everybody in this area across the staff because otherwise it's going to be a pretty tough year or so recruiting.
Yeah, I think the proof is in the pudding. I've said to people, if he is the great offensive mind that we all think he is, once he shows it at Alabama, he'll win kids over, and they'll go, oh, that's a brand of football I want to play and all that. But how much of a hit was it losing Ryan Grubb, who comes over, was highly thought of. Nick Saban tried to get him a year ago to run the offense, and he jumps to the NFL. And now it sounded like they're going to just stay in-house and promote Nick Sheridan, and DeBoer will be the primary play caller. But I just thought, Grubb was going to be a guy who's going to, he's going to show you the offense. But now it's kind of like, are they even going to show you what the full complement of the offense looks like in year one? It just feels like it's a little, for every step forward for Alabama this offseason, it seems like a step back.
Well, do they have the quarterback to run what he wants to operate? Is the first thing. When you take a new job, there's no guarantee that your system's going to be plug and play. What was it? They threw for 116 yards against Michigan. I forget what the total was, but it was paltry at best. That's not going to cut it. Are they going to be able to make the post-snap reads that he needs in that kind of offense? I mean, they were big play after big play at Washington. Quarterback and coaching staff were in sync. Alabama's not in the same spot right now at quarterback. Maybe Ty Thompson or somebody else takes over. I don't know. But if they don't win some this year, your point about recruiting will be elongated. People will be a little more or less likely to jump on board with a guy from out west. He needs a fast start in Tuscaloosa. Completely agree. That'll help him on the recruiting trail. If he can go 9-3, 10-2 this year, I know that's not what Bama fans want, but if he could at least do that, I think it would allow him to kind of get into a groove on the recruiting trail, and Alabama could kind of get back to being Alabama. Maybe not Nick Saban level, but still really good.
He did have one huge splash in recruiting we saw just before we closed out the 2024 class and getting Ryan Williams. Talk to me a little bit about Ryan Williams, because people I've talked to have said, man, a kid, he's just turning 17. I mean, he's still a kid, very much so, but they think he could be that next alpha dog receiver that Bama's kind of been missing here recently.
The only two-time Alabama Mr. Football Award winner. He ran 10-3 in the 100 meters as a sophomore, and he told me to my face that he wasn't even healthy when he ran it. That's a good sign. And he's a kid that is ultra competitive. You put those things together, and that's a player that's a 3-and-out college football player. He's going to come in and compete for a starting job. He's as rare as it gets. Rocket Ismail, Desmond Howard, those kinds of players is who he reminds me of. Elite speed. You have to double him. If you don't, you're playing with fire.
It's going to be fascinating. I think him and Cam Coleman are both going to play from day one and hit the ground running. Let me transition real quick, because we did talk a little bit on Auburn, but I was reading a list of guys who they think, who a lot of the recruiting folks think can hit the ground immediately next year on the football field. Is Cam Coleman one of those guys at Auburn? You think he's a day one starter?
If he learns the playbook, there's no reason he wouldn't be. They don't have anybody like him physically. Great kid, down to earth, but you can't teach 6'4" with the arms of a condor. And he can go. He can make guys miss in space like a 5'9" guy, despite being 6'4". He's got leaping ability. Some of the catches he had at Under Armour's practices reminded me of NFL players. And I say that straight up being honest, like he caught balls that I didn't think he was physically going to even be able to touch. He would snag them. His leaping ability is tremendous. So, yeah, you got to get him on the field in one shape or another, because he's a special talent.
We've got still more to come here on Locked On SEC, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. We'll return. We'll start to talk with Brian Smith about how the 2025 recruiting classes are shaping up in the SEC. That coming your way in just a sec. But first, I want to remind you guys, this episode presented to you by our friends over at the Game Time app. Look, Game Time is the fast and easy way for you to buy all your tickets for all your favorite sporting events. And right now, they have got a special going on for you. When you use our promo code Locked On, that's going to get you $20 off your first purchase. And they got killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat. They got their best price guarantee. Game Time is going to take all the guesswork out of buying tickets. They've got, like I said, the view from your seat. You can see what your view from your chair is going to look like before you even buy the tickets, so you know what to expect when you get to the arena or the stadium. The all-in prices shows your total up front. That's exactly what you're going to be paying. And you can buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps on the screen. They also offer flash deals, sponsored deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts. All of it is up there for you. And the zone deals, you pick the section, and the Game Time picks the seats for big-time savings. And with their Game Time guarantee, it means you're always going to get the best price. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets right now with Game Time. Terms apply. Just download the Game Time app and use our code Locked On. That's going to get you $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Is last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. And one more segment with our buddy Brian Smith, our recruiting insider here on Locked On. And Brian, we have to turn our focus and attention now towards 2025. And as we start to look ahead, we've already seen some guys making some commitments in the last week or so. We saw Tennessee pick up a 3-star wide receiver in Joakim Dotson. We saw Arkansas had a 4-star D lineman in Carius Kern. Auburn added a 3-star tight end in Hollis Davidson. Kentucky with a big-time wide receiver, Quentin Simmons. So I just throw all those names out to say we're just getting started on these 2025 classes for some schools, but already shaping up with a lot of SEC teams up there at the top.
Yeah, it's not any surprise. Georgia, Elijah Griffin and some other kids, they're trying to get who might be the best player in the country, by the way, from the state of Georgia. You're going to look at the same suspects. But there is a lot of shifting with assistant coaches, and I'm sure you followed this. Georgia, LSU, everybody has somebody going somewhere, whether it's a back office guy or something like that. And these relationships that we talked about earlier will help format which teams end up winning the recruiting battles. Kirby does as good a job of anybody. When he loses somebody, obviously his DB coach just got the Syracuse job. Brown was a great recruiter. So he goes and hires somebody he thinks he can replace him and do the same thing. That's not easy. That's why Georgia also has top 3 classes pretty much every single year. LSU's locking down their state. They've already got the top player in the state in Barry. They're doing their thing. When LSU's rolling, it is one of the most difficult schools to out-recruit because the kids in that state are very loyal. And it's a very good year in 25 for the state of Louisiana. Do not be surprised if LSU ends up with the top 5 class. They're rolling really high with Brian Kelly down there. Overall, here's the interesting thing for me. It's still the Alabama stuff that we were talking about. It's an open book. How does DeBoer and his group do? Because Saban went into Kirby's backyard and plucked top players over and over again. That's as hard as it gets. You have to do that if you're Bama. Same with Florida. They got a few of those kids last year, but like when Urban was there, when Spurrier was there, they'd go to Georgia and get a couple of kids that didn't make dog fans very happy. You got to do that to win, to kind of get to that level that Bama's on, or at least their fans want them to continue to be on. Those are the interesting things. And then that team up there just north of Georgia, Tennessee. We talked about them earlier. They're recruiting well. They got the quarterback they won. They needed that to get started in this class. Now can they get the linemen and the defensive players around it and make it a top group? It would not surprise me with the way things have started if at least 5 of the top 7 teams at the end of this cycle are from the Southeastern Conference.
Yeah, it's already shaping up that way. And one more note on LSU, you kind of mentioned, I mean, they're sitting at number 2 right now, just behind Notre Dame, but they've got the number 1 quarterback in Bryce Underwood, the number 1 wide receiver in DeCorian Moore, the number 2 running back in Harlem Berry, who happens to be the number 1 recruit in the state of Louisiana. You're right. I mean, Nick Saban used to always say the best thing about Louisiana or LSU is you don't recruit with anybody else in state. You can lock down that state, put up a fence around it, and keep all the best talent in the state. And when you have a talent-rich year like it looks like 2025 is going to be for Louisiana, it's just a recipe for success. And that's probably one of the big reasons why Brian Kelly left Notre Dame in the first place.
Oh, it definitely was. Recruiting at Notre Dame is a lot harder. The academics, you have to go nationally more. Brian can get in a car and recruit just as much as he would get on a plane and recruit for Notre Dame. Within a 2 to 2.5 hour radius of Baton Rouge, you can have a top 5 class. No lie. You count New Orleans, you count Lafayette, Slidell, and some of the towns around there, a little north and Zachary. You can get 15 recruits easily that are top 300 to top 350 in the nation. It's insane how good that state is. Go pluck a couple kids from Texas, maybe an Atlanta kid, a kid from Miami, and you're done. It's a great job for recruiting. So they're smart. You should lock up your states. That was one of the things that Orgeron and some of the other coaches prior, they'd get a little greedy, try to get LA kids or Maryland kids or whatever. There's plenty of talent right there in the boot. LSU's a great job.
As we close things out, we kind of mentioned, LSU, Oklahoma, Auburn, Georgia, and Tennessee all sitting there in the top 10 right now for 2025. And again, a lot of classes still very much. You got some classes that already have a dozen kids. You got some that only have a couple. So a lot of work left to be done there. But I'm fascinated by Venables because wasn't the best year on the field last year for Oklahoma. They did win the big rivalry game against Texas, but this is a big year for Venables going into year one in the SEC. It feels like, man, he's got to at least win some games here. I think, 7 wins ain't going to get it done there at Oklahoma, but he's at least covering his butt on the back end with recruiting right now.
It gives you leeway. He's probably not going to be where he wants in terms of experience at quarterback and some other key spots. O-line, they lost a lot of guys. Those are the spots where it takes longer to develop. I'm not giddy about Oklahoma's chances on the field, kind of like you, but he's a really good coach. They need to find a way to steal a game. Obviously, if you can beat Texas, that cures a lot of ills, but recruiting is the one mainstay. It's not hard to sell that Oklahoma symbol when it walks into the building. And he's had top classes already there. They had some success to beat Texas. They can sell their brand a little easier. Should they have a top 10 class? Possibly. There's no reason they can't. They're recruiting Dallas every day. That's their kind of their home base. So that's an interesting program. I wouldn't bet on them having a great year on the field, but I like them better on the recruiting trail.
It's still so weird to talk about Texas and Oklahoma as SEC teams, but yet here we are. He is Brian Smith. No one does it better. We're covering all things recruiting. Let everybody know where they can find you, man.
At FBScout_Florida. This is the time, like I said at the beginning of the show, with all the stuff going on, the camps and combines, videos from Under Armour camps and 7-on-7s, top players all across the country.
And just 2 days ago, he was posting a ton of videos on there, so you can find all his great content there. Brian, always good to talk with you, man, and thanks for the time. We'll do it again real soon.
All right, buddy. I appreciate it. Take care.
All right, that is Brian Smith there. Does a great job covering all things recruiting for us at Locked On. Thank you guys so much for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. Shout out to everydayers. Come on back tomorrow on the show for your second listen. Go check out Locked On has created their first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today, right there for you on YouTube. 24/7 streaming with all the top stories in the sports world. I'm Chris Gordy. This has been Locked On SEC. We'll talk to you guys tomorrow.